We're back again with Water Codes Chapter 7, the critical nature of patterns. And the word critical is in parentheses. So the nature of patterns, but the critical nature of patterns. Begins with a quote from Chuck Palahniuk, who's a journalist, a novelist. Just a journalist and a novelist. There are only patterns. Patterns on top of patterns, patterns that affect other patterns, patterns hidden by patterns, patterns within patterns. If you watch close, history does nothing but repeat itself. What we call chaos is just patterns we haven't recognized. What we call random is just patterns we can't decipher. What we can't understand we call nonsense. What we can't read we call gibberish. And that's the end of that quote. There is a second quote. Nature uses only the longest threads to weave her patterns, so that each small piece of her fabric reveals the organization of the entire tapestry. There's a quote by Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize in Physics, The Character of Physical Law, 1965. Patterns are everywhere. All of nature is based on geometries, vectors, vertices, patterns, and fractals. From the macrocosmic to the microcosmic, we see the intelligence of patterns as the basis of creation. Our understanding of our natural environment is dependent upon us recognizing the patterns that exist in all of the many expressions of nature. Plants grow, branch, and leaf in precise ratios and patterns of development for optimum health. Seashells display exquisite Fibonacci spirals. Coral, sea slugs, and leafy greens display the once theoretical hyperbolic geometries. Hyperbolic referring to a type of curved space where two parallel lines actually can reach the same point. These geometries, which operate in a curved space, were once thought by modern mathematicians to exist only in imaginary hyperbolic space. These mathematicians had spent too much time thinking in terms of the traditional, flat, two-dimensional, and completely uncurved mythical plane of Euclidean space. The imaginary realm where most mathematics are performed and the flat lines in space we are given to work in when conducting graphs, measurements, examining angles, and even visualizing electromagnetic waves, which of course cannot be two-dimensional, as nothing in our universe is. Had these mathematicians simply paid a little more attention to the patterns they observe in our natural world and life, rather than the patterns and rules they follow in imaginary flat space, hyperbolic geometries would have never been theoretical in the first place. Instead, mathematicians would have recognized these geometries amongst ocean life, salad plates, or dried apples, which express these shapes in their normal appearance. Indeed, learning itself is based on pattern recognition, which determines everything from the perception of our environment to our awareness of patterns of behavior or situations. Even the visual perception of our surroundings, what we see when we look around us, is largely based upon pattern recognition. One experiment demonstrated that kittens, when raised in an environment lacking either horizontal or vertical lines, would fail to recognize these lines when exposed to an environment containing them. Kittens raised with only vertical lines could not recognize horizontal lines. And likewise, kittens raised with only horizontal lines were unable to recognize and respond to vertical lines. Needless to say, this caused quite a catastrophe when the kittens became exposed to a new environment with these lines and structures they did not perceive. Some cats appear to never be able to recognize these lines again, while other cats seemed to experience a learning curve of recognition during which time, it is assumed, they recognize the new patterns of experience based on the effect of these new vertical lines in their environment. Their brain and visual perception appears to open to incorporate these new rules of their surroundings, rules that involve the existence of both horizontal and vertical lines. This type of work has massive implications for the importance of patterns and our potential ability to only see what we have learned to see, akin to a type of developmental visual conditioning. Even germs were discovered by the recognition of patterns, when a Hungarian physician recognized the pattern between washed and unwashed hands in regards to the incidence of infections. Although he couldn't offer any scientific explanation for the benefit of hand washing, Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis recognized the pattern of the rise of infant mortality rates and infection when the doctor's hands were not washed, years before the germ theory was confirmed by Louis Pasteur and others, shortly after Semmelweis's death. Unfortunately, Dr. Semmelweis was not as well received as Pasteur. Instead, he was ridiculed by the medical community, who denied his desperate insistence they adopt his hand-washing methods, and was committed to an insane asylum where he was beaten to death by guards. The story of Semmelweis itself represents a pattern. He is not the first doctor or scientist to be ridiculed, jailed, or committed for their discovery. Medicine, science, biology, physics, and astronomy are all based on patterns. Even the study of psychology and behavior, any kind of behavior, is completely based on patterns because our psychology and behavior are pattern-based. We make personal judgments, relationship decisions, and our life choices all based on pattern recognition. Then there's a quote, "But according to patterns, rules, or as we call them, laws of nature." End quote from Carl Sagan. The intelligence of patterns goes far deeper than our astronomical, biological, or psychological patterns. It pervades our existence from the highest levels, the macrocosm of our universe, down to the microcosmic, the atomic, and molecular levels of patterns of geometric structures and organizations. Beyond even that, the intelligence of patterns reaches into the levels of magnetism and energetics, wherein there exist patterns of geometric structures and organizations which give rise to the manifestation of energetic fields and their own corresponding geometric patterns and organization, creating the morphogenetic fields in which we operate and the matrix of consciousness in which creation and beingness manifest. Morphogenetic fields, also called morphic or morphogenic fields, are described by Rupert Sheldrake and others as energy fields that constitute a species-specific collective memory, much like the collective consciousness described by the great psychologist Carl Jung. This collective consciousness memory is information contained in an energetic field, a field that is dynamic and ever-changing, constantly storing and updating its information in its patterns. This energetic field contains information to which we have access to retrieve information as well as to contribute information. These morphogenetic fields are said to account for the information that is critical for an organism to develop from embryo to adult, information and ancestral memory that is not present in our DNA. This information is necessary for our existence, development, and evolution, and the theory developed by Rupert Sheldrake is well-founded in strong support for the existence of such morphogenetic fields, which he defines as, quote, "the organizing fields of animal and human behavior, of social and cultural systems, and of mental activity can all be regarded as morphic fields which contain an inherent memory." End quote. That's Rupert Sheldrake from The Presence of the Past. What he describes are patterns of energy which contain information. From the smallest seashells to the apparent empty space around us, we are surrounded by patterns. Through our evolution, humans have come to understand that patterns contain information, and that by recognizing patterns, we can incorporate new information into our understanding and adjust how we interact with our environment for our benefit. Patterns are how we learn, and patterns are the rules of our universe. Recall the importance of the structure of the protein molecule rather than its chemical composition. The pattern of structure carries the information. Electromagnetic and energy waves express this concept very well. We are told that all waves persist or travel in a pattern which includes its waveform, amplitude, and frequency. This specific pattern of waveform, amplitude, and frequency carries the energetic information, be it sound, light, satellite, cell phone waves, Wi-Fi waves, or human emotional and energetic emissions. At the foundation of our existence, we find that all energy is information and is encoded in patterns. This holds true whether speaking of the patterns of electromagnetic activity, subtle energy, or the even less tangible patterns of emotional connections and consciousness. These patterns of energy must be processed and translated by our systems in order for us to appropriately respond to the new level of information. This is most easily seen in our sensory perceptions, where patterns of energy, whether audible sound, visual light, patterns of aroma, etc., are processed by our systems into understandable information that we then use to establish a functioning perception of our environment and existence. In reality, our bodies, through our senses, are providing us our experience of our physical reality only by recognizing and interacting with patterns. The reality of our physical experience and the fundamental mechanics of our electromagnetic universe dictate an extremely interesting reality, as discussed by physicists like Michio Kaku and others, in that nothing in our universe actually comes into contact with anything else. Because there is a space surrounding all atoms which consist of a strong electromagnetic field where electrons, particles of charged energy, are bouncing, zipping, and moving around. It is not the actual atom that comes into contact with other atoms. Instead, it is only the electromagnetic fields that are touching and interacting. We don't actually touch anything. Rather, the extremely dense electromagnetic energy of our body, which carries and conducts information, comes into contact with the extremely dense electromagnetic energy of the thing we are touching. The patterns of electromagnetic energy of the thing we are touching are the only things with which we are truly interacting, and our electromagnetic fields, in turn, decode these patterns into information which it can then process as sensory information. Even when you feel as though you are touching something, it is really nerves zipping up electricity through your body in decodable patterns for processing in the brain. It is the pattern of energy that tell us whether a thing is soft or hard, fuzzy or smooth, sweet or salty. The same applies to sound and light, which are more obvious examples of this principle. Light waves, such as electromagnetic energy waves, or also known as electromagnetic energy waves, are received by the electromagnetic energy fields of our eyes, which translates the patterns of light into information processed by the brain to relay a certain color, shade, or otherwise visual perception. Sound waves, also known as patterned electromagnetic energy waves, reach the electromagnetic fields of our eardrums and canals, where the patterns of the waves are decoded into audible sound. In essence, it is truly the crystallographic patterned nature of our energetic and electromagnetic universe interacting with the liquid crystallographic patterned nature of our physical system, which allows us to experience the sensations of this amazing existence. Patterns interacting with patterns, and patterned energetic fields interacting with and in water. There are many other patterns of energy and information outside of our perceivable senses of touch, sound, taste, smell, and sight. There are so many other patterns of energy information, in fact, that on a spectrum chart of the known different electromagnetic energy patterns, those that are perceivable to our senses represent an extremely small and very insignificant percentage. While we may not be able to perceive these different electromagnetic frequencies, we are still responding to them nearly every moment, whether we are consciously aware of it or not. These different frequency patterns have been shown to have enormous impacts on life and human health. In addition to electromagnetic frequency patterns, there are also patterns of subtle energy and magnetoelectricity, energies that may not be detectable, but for which there is substantial support for their existence and actions. All of these energies are abundant in our environment and are proven to have marked effects on our minds, bodies, and spirits. And there are the patterns of consciousness, the intangible patterns of experience, thought, and behavior, which we now know have power well beyond that which science has acknowledged. Our patterns of consciousness are the major driving forces of our wellness, and they can have immediate and dramatic effects on our minds, bodies, and spirits. The evidence for this lies in every motivating lecture, effective psychological therapy, and every consciousness-based healing and miracle experienced throughout time, from the ancient faith healings of our world's religions to the modern-day effective psychological therapies, energy healing practices, and the everyday healing miracles of the effective consciousness, including events such as the witnessed and documented dissipating cancer tumors during the chants of a group of monks. Such an event cannot be reduced to the effect of the sound created by such chanting. It is the result of a consciousness-based energetic effect, which, like everything else, operates on patterns. Our body receives all of these patterns of energy, whether that information is translated by our sensory perceptions or not. Not only are our audio and visual range a very small portion of the electromagnetic scale, they also operate within a filter system in the brain, which only processes in our conscious mind a very small percentage of the information it actually receives as usable. It is theorized that the massive amount of information that does not get consciously processed is still stored somewhere within the body or mind, that intangible place of subconscious and conscious memory storage, which exists within the structure of our water system rather than a localized section of the brain or body, as we will soon discuss. We know that all kinds of energy affect our systems, and thus we know that our bodies are receiving and reacting to incoming energy and information of which we are unaware. But how is our body able to perform such amazing feats on a constant basis? How can it possibly be receiving so much information akin to an incredibly dynamic antenna? And how can it possibly process and react to so much information, more complex than the most advanced computing system we could ever dream of? It does so through our water system, which acts as an antenna and interface between energy and our physical systems, and between information and our experience. We already know that water has a profound responsiveness to consciousness, subtle energy, and magnetism, as well as electromagnetic information. Water reacts to the patterns of information to which it is exposed, whether consciousness and subtle energy or electromagnetic information, and rearranges its own pattern or structure accordingly to incorporate the new information. This phenomenon also occurs in the water in our bodies, where new information is expressed as a change in pattern and has the largest impact on our energetic and physical systems, a phenomena we will examine when discussing our body's water system and the physical and energetic interface properties of our biowaters. There's a quote here: "Information in the form of energy streams in simultaneously through all of our sensory systems, and then it explodes into this enormous collage of what this present moment looks like, what it feels like, and what it sounds like." End quote from Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, neuroscientist. And that also ends Chapter 7.